Hello everyone, I'm Michael. Welcome back to the channel. It's kind of weird saying my name Michael. I usually go by Professor on the other channel, but anyway, you could call me Michael here. Or Prof if you still want to. I'll answer to that. I wanted to talk about something that is only going to be of interest to certain people, or maybe others, I don't know. But, I've talked about how wanting to start a real rock band with this channel and my place in life and everything, and that's what I'm working towards. And just good guitar slinging rock. It's interesting, though, because the last time when I was in my 20s, really doing rock bands and whatnot, especially when I was in my teens, I grew up evangelical Protestant in a very sort of typical, marketable evangelical, way. I've since, converted to Catholicism and I'm not in that world anymore, but I was in that world. And that meant if you were, a teenager like me in that world, you were big into CCM, contemporary Christian music. So, and this is the 90s into the 2000s. So bands like DC Talk and Newsboys, they were just ruling that, when it came to the Christian rock, era. And at the time, there was a real difference between your praise and worship music and your Christian rock. The Christian rock was just rock, Of course, a lot of the Christian rock bands just ended up doing praise and worship. And that's kind of what the genre is pretty much mostly what it is now, to be honest. I don't really follow CCM anymore. I kind of got out of it. But I always had a soft spot in my heart for some of the musicians and some of the cool songs and bands, and sounds that I heard. In fact, I was mentioning to somebody the other day that going back and listening, I rediscovered a couple of the old Newsboys albums. And I was listening to them in the era where, even John James was first there with them, but Peter Furler and Phil Joel, fronted by that era. And Phil Joel was the bassist, and I realized, I think he actually influenced me, his bass playing, some of those licks, I kind of hear in my playing today. The reason I bring it up, though, is because if you don't know anything about CCM, the genre is pretty much dead at this point. It's the huge scandal, has rocked everything. If you know about CCM, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, if you're new, if you're kind of somebody looking in on the window on this, I'll tell you about it. Michael Tate, who was the big deal, one of the members of the DC Talk, and then became eventually the front man for Newsboys when Peter Furler left. So he's been a part helming the two biggest bands, you can think of in CCM. Well, all this stuff has come out now, which he's admitted to. He was having these young boys over, getting them inebriated and whatnot on certain drugs, chemicals, or whatever, and then getting them to perform certain sexual acts with him, which he's admitted to some of it being true. We don't know how much he's confessed to or whatever. Anyway, it's a big deal right now. And it's a big deal, not just that there would be you can see some general hypocrisy of it in a movement or people that profess a certain lifestyle, then going and living that lifestyle, but just the victimization of it is the real thing. That's the real thing that's, I think, killing the movement, because it's kind of peeled back the layer and you realize that CCM is really just a profiting business. Sure, many of the individuals within it might be sincere in their faith and whatnot, and I'm sure there are some sincere artists out there, but it's just really peeled back the layer that the underlying problem is that there's an industry beneath it that just wants to make money, and it will cover up victimizations, it'll cover up anything like that it needs to, as long as it can still try and use these people to make money. So that's a big deal that the whole industry is going through. I'm not in that industry. The reason I bring it up, though, is because if I was in my 20s or early 20s, teens, trying to start a band, again, like I'm doing now in my 40s, I would have sincerely contemplated whether I wanted to start a Christian band. That would be something I would be thinking over at that point. It's not where my faith is. It's not how I view art these days at all, but it was back then. And it's interesting seeing that even that avenue I might have taken back then is pretty much fallen apart. I mean, I am a Christian. I'm a Catholic. I'm a devout Catholic. But I understand that art is art. You don't need to go hire a Christian plumber to come to your house. So you don't need to be listening to a Christian artist. At the same time, I don't want to be in a band that's playing songs at concerts that my nieces might come to, with certain lyrics that I might listen to in the quiet of my home and enjoy the music, but I don't really want to, So there's just sort of a fine line. And I got to thinking about it. I was like, yeah, I just want to provide good rock music for people. I'll be sort of mindful in whatever kind of band that gets started here about the types of songs we play. Man, that was a big hit. People like it, but the lyrics are a little questionable. I just don't want to be up there representing that meaning to people necessarily. But other than that, I just want to play good, solid rock music, from all the bands that I've mentioned in other videos and stuff, and just good good rock music that was around from the 70s to the 2000s, and bring that, the gift of rock music into people's lives, bring a little joy to them, whether it's in a restaurant setting, bar setting, party, festival, or whether it's a YouTube setting, whether I'm playing some bass covers here on YouTube, or whether I'm, in a band that gets together and some original music and we put that out. That's all, in the future and things that I'm working on and planning. So, but it was just interesting. And I know it's kind of rocked a lot of people in the CCM who are still into CCM, still listening to contemporary Christian music. And, and people are going off on either extreme of it, like, oh, the whole industry's dead, there's no hope for it, they're all a bunch of hypocrites, which of course isn't true. There's still many sincere people, I'm sure, who work in the industry or want to put music in that industry. But it's rather naive to think that this hasn't fundamentally changed how that industry is going to look going forward, for better or worse. That's just a thing. So, but yeah, it was interesting in my own, kind of musical journey. That's the way I would have gone. But yeah, that crumbled hard, or at least it crumbled in the way that I wouldn't feel comfortable. I'm not the kind of person that would want to start a Christian band these days anyway, because I think that Christian music and that genre is very restrictive. The lyrics get really cheesy quite often. There's some great stuff that's been done in that genre, but it's just so restrictive. I prefer bands like, Collective Soul, who, probably are Christian. If they are, they don't really talk about it. I think they'd admit to growing up like that, but they just make rock. They just make wonderful, solid rock, and the lyrics are profound. It's great, But even if I was the type of person who would want to start a Christian band, I wouldn't with all this stuff going on. It's pretty, that'd be pretty hard trying to sell yourself as a CCM act today. And yeah, hopefully this works out. Of course, praying for the poor victims and everything, but hopefully this gets resolved some which way, which is healthy for people and not an issue. In the meantime, I'll be here playing good solid rock and trying to rock and bring that rock back to the world. So you can follow me on this channel to continue with my progress there. Just figured I'd talk about the whole CCM thing because it was part of my thought process, or part of my, oh my gosh, this really happened discovery lately, and it's relevant. We'll talk a lot more about some other music. We'll talk about some of my favorite bass players. I don't want this just to be a bass channel, though, but we'll talk about rock in general. And, eventually, once I get together with some other musicians, we'll get them in on this as well. So more to come. Until then, keep staying tuned.